Thank you for joining me for another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I'm here at the News Forum where all voices matter. You know, most of the important issues of the day have some connection with intellectual property protection and how to spur the most innovation in our country. We're delighted to have with us today Richard Owens, who is the Munk Senior Fellow with the Laurier Institute think tank. He's also an intellectual property lawyer. Welcome to the program, Richard.
Great to be with you.
I guess the thing that's on most people's minds right now is vaccine availability. And policymakers have been grappling with how to make sure we have this supply that's not only here right now, but also supply going forward, because we've got these variants of concern when it comes to COVID, and there might be other things that come down the pipe as well. So I guess my question to you is, how should we encourage more vaccine availability with intellectual property protections in place?
Yeah, that's a great question. The problem with vaccines is that we're essentially reaping what we've sown over many, many years by failing to support the life sciences industry in Canada through intellectual property laws, through sound innovation policy. We have not only neglected to do what we ought to have done, but have been actively hostile to the industry in this country. We have for many years provided substandard intellectual property protection. We have allowed very significant problems in intellectual property to persist, resulting even in a complaint under NAFTA for damages. We have and we have expropriated pricing power for pharmaceuticals. So all in all, a very hostile environment for the pharmaceutical industry. It is not surprising that we have come to a pass where we do not have any leverage to negotiate with these people, or we haven't contributed to the worldwide innovation ecology for vaccines and other life science therapies. So we need to change that. And now is a great moment to talk about it, because a lot of people are thinking about these issues in a way they weren't before, because suddenly they're coming home to us with the COVID pandemic. What we need to do is to develop a sounder intellectual property approach that, in particular for pharmaceuticals, provides not only the level of patent and data protection that other jurisdictions provide, and we don't, but we need also to give them better access to our market. We're threatening them now, and have been for years, with draconian new regulations that will expropriate up to almost 83% of the price of many drugs. That simply makes selling them here uneconomic. The consequence, of course, will be further catastrophe for Canadians' health, because drugs simply won't be available here. So it's a very perverse policy. For some reason, the government won't drop it, although it keeps postponing implementation for several years. So we need to change this and create an environment where the life sciences industry is welcome. Israel faced the same issue, by the way. It had policies similar to ours. The government of the day consulted with industry and asked, what can we do to make our jurisdiction more inviting for your investment? They listened. They made changes. They made changes that we should make, and they are now a leader, in a very short time, a leader in life sciences industries. Why can't we do that? Why can't we hope for the same kind of innovation for Canada? And prudently, why don't we participate in a worldwide economy for the development of these therapies that will bring us to the table, that will accord us fair treatment when the next crisis arrives? Because it will.
We have less than a minute before the break, so I'll have to ask this quickly, but just explain, and maybe we'll have to pick this up after the break too, but explain, because intuitively, maybe I'll get my part in and we'll get to you. But intuitively, I'm sure the argument has been, and I've been in those rooms, well, the fact of the matter is, if we can get cheaper drug prices, if we can, beat up on the pharmaceutical sector a little bit, it means that our healthcare system is more sustainable and that we can spend money on doctors, nurses, and hospitals rather than pharmaceuticals. So that has been the trade-off, if you will, that as presented to policymakers. So
Right.
Hold that thought, because we are going to go to a break, but I'd love to get your response to that and why intellectual property protection is important. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm here with Richard Owens. He is a Munk Senior Fellow with the Laurier Institute think tank. He's also an intellectual property lawyer. I went into a big sort of intro there before the break about what the counter argument is at the policy making tables about why it's important to hem our pharmaceutical sector in. I'd love to get your response to that at this time.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak to that. Look, the reality is, of course, getting everything for a lower price, disciplining the markets in which we have to buy things is all good. If we're going to beat up on pharmaceutical providers, let's beat up on doctors and nurses and the cost of the construction companies that provide us with hospitals. And indeed, we should be reducing the salaries of the public service that looks after those services for us. Why stop with drugs? The difference with drugs is, we make the assumption that they are endlessly elastic in pricing. They're not. They are subject to economics and competition like every other sector. When we reduce prices on drugs, we are unfairly forcing the costs of their development into other markets, particularly the United States, whose consumers unfairly bear benefits that we get in our healthcare system. And we are not doing our part to fund development of further drug therapies that are going to benefit us in the long run. So we're just free riding. Why do we want to do that?
So let's return to the prescriptions. You were starting in on that. How can we ensure more availability of pharmaceutical products? Obviously, right now, top of mind is we need more vaccines in the future. This cannot go on where we're a price taker and that we're a supply taker. So let's drill down a little bit more on what we should be doing differently.
So interesting and very big question, which we can't treat of all the aspects of it, but let's take it in two quick parts. One, domestic policy. We need to create an environment where we favor innovation, where we encourage investment in pharmaceutical companies here, where they know that their investment will be rewarded. And some of that is as simple as creating a productive economy, fair tax treatment, better access to capital for technology companies. And some of it is saying, well, we're not going to expropriate almost all of your pricing power because we hate you, because that's not a good political economy gesture, frankly. We need to also open up our domestic local markets in the healthcare sector, because having a robust domestic market actually turns out to be a fairly major factor in the development of new technologies and therapies.
So what do you mean by open up our domestic markets? What does that mean exactly?
It means providing quicker access, quicker regulatory approval, and quicker uptake in our healthcare system for new drugs. One of the issues we've got is we're really good at saying, that's expensive, we shouldn't be buying it. We're not so good at saying, that's expensive, but look at the value it delivers to the system. We get people out of hospital in 30 days instead of 130. We're going to save a ton of money even if the initial drug's expensive. We get longer lifespans. We get greater productivity from our citizens. All of those benefits aren't accounted for well in our healthcare economy. So we need to get more innovative, not only in how we treat technology companies, but how we deliver healthcare services, frankly, to create more of a domestic market for their technologies. The other thing that we have to keep in mind, though, is we're a pretty small country. We're good. We've got a great educated workforce. We've got a good healthcare system, sort of. But but we're not going to be able to provide all drugs. We're not going to be able to even manufacture all the vaccines we need. They are too various, they are too complex, and indeed, nobody can, because modern technologies like these vaccines often require complex supply chains and ingredients from many different jurisdictions. So in terms of that, while it's important for the government to encourage domestic capacity to the fullest extent possible, we also want to be participating in as dense as possible research and sharing networks and treaty negotiations to ensure access to supplies in the time of crisis. The surest, best strategic position is have everything on hand in Canada. We can't get there. We're not big enough. So we need to adopt this broader strategy. It's complex. It's multidimensional, and I'm not sure the current government is up to it. But it's the only way we're going to be able to protect our citizens in the case of future healthcare crises.
And we're back here at Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Richard Owens, who is a Munk Senior Fellow with the Laurier Institute think tank. He is also an intellectual property lawyer. Richard, I couldn't let it go without commentary. Obviously, one of the big news items out of the United States was President Biden's executive order waiving certain patent protections. Tell us what that's all about.
Oh, it's a catastrophe is what it is. It's enormously complex, but what happens is that the intellectual property protections for pharmaceuticals are resisted at the international level by a wide number of actors, often instigated by governments who are looking to save money, looking for opportunities to corruption, looking to favor local industries who are more often generic and not innovation-based industries, and indeed by a host of ideologues who simply don't want a private sector-based pharmaceutical industry. They have pushed into the World Trade Organization a resolution sponsored by India and South Africa to get the agreement of all the World Trade Organization members. Not going to happen, but get the agreement of all those members to waive the intellectual property protections for all therapies and devices and vaccines related to the treatment of COVID-19 for the foreseeable future. Getting the agreement of the members, getting them to negotiate the terms of that exemption is going to be very difficult. Now, the United States has always, and I believe entirely rightly, stood up against this kind of, frankly, outright theft. The world depends upon intellectual property protections for these devices, therapies, and vaccines to ensure their development. So they'll be there in times of need. What has led Joe Biden to take this extraordinary step? I don't know. The Wall Street Journal called it bewildering and the worst economic decision since Nixon introduced wage and price controls. I think they're right. But in any event, he's made that mistake. Canada shouldn't make that mistake. Here's a great opportunity to finally show some support for the industry that we want to win over to our side. The sort of intellectual economic foundation of the resolution from the beginning just has been disappointingly weak. And the idea that the main home of innovation, the place from where over half of all the hundreds of COVID-19 vaccines and therapies have been produced, the United States has just lost the ball. It's inexplicable.
Well, I'm surprised that this is not more of an issue, but we'll obviously follow this very closely. Can I ask a different? Sorry, go ahead.
I'll just say very quickly. I had an extensive editorial in the Financial Post this morning on that topic. So if
Okay,
you
good.
want to unpack more of the issue, it's there.
Read the Financial Post. I'd love to
Always.
just talk a little bit more broadly about the state of intellectual property protection and what in Canada and what that means for our innovation levels in this country. Can you give us a kind of an overview generally now?
Sure, you're a master at asking big questions.
At least I don't have to answer them anymore. There we go.
Well, yeah. So of course, we're doing not bad in terms of intellectual property, not too badly. The thing with intellectual property, of course, is you can never quite talk about intellectual property without getting into, well, which intellectual property and which issues relating to the intellectual property. So very quickly, in terms of patents, we're doing moderately well. There were some major problems with our patent legislation and its interpretation. Those have gradually been resolved. We've committed to favorable improvements in the last North American Trade Agreement, and that has led to some significant improvements. The biggest outstanding issues there are subject matter. We don't have quite a wide enough scope for what is allowed to be patented in Canada. We should change that. I don't think that's a major hindrance to innovation, but it's foreseeably a problem.
Let's just break there, and we'll continue after the break because this is an important discussion. Please stay with us. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tony Clement here at Boom and Bust, and speaking with Richard Owens, an intellectual property lawyer, Munk Senior Fellow with the Laurier Institute. I had to cut you off there, but we were talking a little bit about intellectual property protection in Canada. Please continue with your thoughts on patent protection, et cetera.
Thanks. So subject matter for patents needs to be improved. Another patent issue is related to patent is data protection for pharmaceuticals. I won't go into what that is at length, but essentially it's protecting clinical and other data related to a new drug that has to be provided to regulatory authorities as a condition of marketing. The term for that is too short in Canada. We need to extend it. It's long past time we did that. And then we've got the Patented Medicine Prices Review Board, which I'm about to release a major study on, which it confiscates pricing for drugs in Canada and needs to be reined in, I think, fairly dramatically. In terms of copyright, biggest issue with copyright, of course, is pirated material on the internet. The government of the day, as it happens, has suggested that is supportive of a website blocking proposal, which is a great idea. There are just too many sites, most of them offshore and beyond the reach of our laws, who provide pirated content, movies and television into Canada. And there's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't be stopping them at the border. It's easy to do. It's entirely just. There is not a speech issue involved with it. So it's time we tackled that and put that into place. The other major, and it is indeed a very major issue, although it's a complex one with copyright, is education. We have right now an educational industry which is interpreting an exemption in the Copyright Act to stop paying authors. In this time of COVID, authors are starving. Distributions from the educational sector, which used to amount to millions of dollars, to Canadian Indigenous authors are now reduced to nothing. And there's a fight going on in the courts. The educational sector keeps losing and being told what it's doing is unreasonable and that it's going to be liable for damages, but collecting for various reasons is quite complicated. It's now going to the Supreme Court this month. We're on tenterhooks to see what happens. But if it doesn't work out, it's got to be solved legislatively. It's absolutely critical for this country. So those are the biggest issues, frankly, right now, and all of them have very major impacts on innovation. And I do think that publishing books and culture and documenting our history This too feeds innovation, and indeed is innovation.
Are there best practices in other jurisdictions that we should be looking at?
Yeah, great question. There are some other jurisdictions, the European Union and the United States, that do particularly well in terms of life sciences innovation. Israel is another good example. And also, most of these areas, in particular, well, actually, really both copyright and patent, and trademark and other areas of intellectual property are very much the subject of treaty. So in fact, there is a lot of harmonization between jurisdictions, and treaty is one of the most common ways for us to increase and improve our intellectual property protections by new standards imposed on us by treaty, which is a problem. Why don't we do it on our own initiative? Why don't we say we want innovation in this country? Let's be leaders and not followers. If we solve the problems we've got with pharmaceutical and other life sciences intellectual property now, we'd be making a great statement about wanting innovation here.
Well, we're going to have to leave it at that. I want to thank Richard Owens for coming on the program. He is the Munk Senior Fellow with the Laurier Institute think tank. He is also an intellectual property lawyer. Very, very interesting discussion. I got to about half my questions, so we're definitely going to have to get you back because it's such an important field for our economy. Thanks for being here.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Would like to thank Richard Owens again. He's a senior fellow with the Laurier Institute think tank, talking about intellectual property. You can see how our laws and how we approach patent protection and copyright protection affect the ability for real issues, whether we have vaccines or not, or whether we've got a culture industry or not. So these are not esoteric issues. They're important issues. Hopefully we'll have them back in the near future. But thanks for watching.